In the last video, we discussed the historical origins of Islam and Muhammad. We saw how the life and sayings of Muhammad was written 200 to 300 years after he died, and these were written by people who were not eyewitness nor people who got it from the eyewitness, which is devastating. And we can't trust a man no one knows nothing about until 200 to 300 years after he died. We are now going to continue from where we left off. We are now going to discuss the history of the Quran. We are going to see how the Quran was compiled. Since Muslims claim that the Quran is eternal, well preserved and has never been changed, like if you read Surah 15:9, we have without that sent the message and we will assuredly guide it from corruption. As we read from this surah, these revelations which was sent down to Muhammad by Allah was promised to be guided and preserved. Muslim scholars interpret this ayah, which means verse in the Quran, as a divine promise that the text of the Quran would be preserved perfectly, down to the smallest detail. We are now going to test the Quran divine origin based on whether the promise of Allah in Surah 15:9 was fulfilled. So, sit down, take a pen and a notebook, because we will now review the history of the Quran according to Muslim sources, allowing us to see if this book was really from God or Allah, like they say. Let's begin. The first Quranic revelation from the alleged angel Jibril or Gabriel came to Muhammad around the year 610 AD. Muhammad delivered many more verses to his scribes and companions for memorizations and recording over the next 2 decades. And these verses were written on stacks of palm leaves, they were written on bones of dead animals, they were written on flat stones and other materials. But there was no complete manuscript of the Quran during this time. When Muhammad died in 632 AD, all Quranic revelations stopped. Shortly after Muhammad's death, the first Caliph Abu Bakr needed to suppress a rebellion. Because of that, he sent many Ufas. So the Ufas were people who had memorized portions of the revelations from Muhammad. He sent these people to fight at the Battle of Yamamam, which were fought in December 632 AD. Many of these Ufas died in this Battle of Yamamam, and Muslim sources tell us that portions of the Quran were lost. Let's read Ibn Abi Dawud Kitab al-Masaif. Many of the passages of the Quran that were sent down were known by those who died on the day of Yamamam, but they were not known by those who survived them, nor were they written down, nor had Abu Bakr, Umar or Uthman by that time collected the Quran, nor were they found with even one person after them. So we see that many of those Ufas who memorized the revelations died at the Battle of Yamamam. So because of this, Abu Bakr, the first caliph, decided that it was time to gather what remained of the Quran in order to prevent more from being lost, since almost everyone who memorized it has died. And he appointed a man known as Zayd bin Thabit to this task. After Zayd bin Thabit completed his codex around 634 AD, it remained in Abu Bakr's possession until his death. It was passed on to the next caliph, Umar, the caliph after Abu Bakr. When Umar died, it was given to Hafsa, a widow of Muhammad. For more details about this, you can read Sahih al-Bukhari 4986. During the reign of Uthman, approximately 19 years after the death of Muhammad, dispute arose concerning the correct recitation of the Quran. Uthman, who was the third caliph after the death of Muhammad, ordered that the copy of the Quran which was given to Hafsa, along with all known textual materials, should be gathered together so that an official version might be compiled. Then Zayd bin Thabit, who compiled the first codex during the time of Abu Bakr, and 3 other men, Abdullah bin al-Zubayr, Sa'id bin al-As, and Abdurrahman bin Harith, worked diligently to construct a revised text of the Quran. When it was finished, Uthman then sent the new codex to every Muslim province, one copy of what they had copied, and ordered that all the other Quranic materials, whether written in fragmentary manuscripts or old copies, be burnt. For more details about this, you can read the Hadith Sahih al-Bukhari 4987. And the Quran we have today is descended from the Uthmani Codex. Not all Muslims approved the new Quran which were formed by Uthman. Indeed, some of Muhammad's top teachers rejected Zayd bin Thabit version. Muhammad once told his followers to learn the recitation of the Quran from 4 men, from Abdullah bin Masud, who started with him, Salim, the freed slave of Abu Ifai Muad bin Jabbar, and Ubay bin Kaba. Sorry for the pronunciation. For more details about this, you can read the Hadith Sahih Al-Bukhari 3808. Interestingly, Ibn Masud, first on Muhammad's list, said that the Quran should only have 111 chapters. Today's versions has 114 chapters, and he said chapter 1, chapter 113 and chapter 114 shouldn't have been included in the Quran. Because of this, along with hundreds of other textual differences, Ibn Masud went so far as to call the final edition of the Quran deception. He said, "The people have been guilty of deceit in the reading of the Quran. I like it better to read according to the recitation of him, that is Muhammad, whom I love more than that of Zayd bin Thabit." For more details about this, you can read Ibn Sa'id Kitab Tabaqat Kabir, volume 2, page 444. So, should Muslims submit to this deceit? Not surprisingly, Ibn Masud even advised Muslims to reject Zayd bin Thabit's Quran and to keep their own versions, even to hide them so that they will not be confiscated by the government, he said. We read this from Jami at-Tirmidhi 3104. O you Muslim people, avoid copying the Mus'haf and the recitation of this man. By Allah, when I accepted Islam, he was but in the layers of a disbelieving man, meaning Zayd bin Thabit. And it was in regarding this that Abdullah bin Masud said, O people of Iraq, keep the Musahif that are with you and conceal them. Here is where it gets more interesting and devastating. Ibn Masud wasn't the only one of Muhammad's trusted teachers who disagree with Zayd bin Thabit's Quran. Ubay bin Kaba was Muhammad's best reciters and one of only Muslims to collect the materials of the Quran during Muhammad's lifetime. Yet, Ibn Kaba believed that Zayd bin Thabit's Quran was missing 2 chapters. Later, Muslims were therefore forced to reject some of Ibn Kaba's recitation, as we read from Sahih Al-Bukhari 5005. Umar said, Ubay was the best of us in the recitation of the Quran, yet we leave some of what he recites. Ubay says, I have taken it from the mouth of Allah's Messenger and will not leave it for anything whatever. Due to this dispute among Muhammad and big reciters, Muslims are faced with a dilemma. If Muslims say that the Quran we have today has been perfectly preserved, then they have to say that Muhammad was horrible at choosing scholars, since he selected men who disagreed with today's text. If on the other hand, Muslims try to disagree by saying that their prophet would know whom to pick regarding Islam's book, then they must conclude that the Quran we have today is flawed and not from Muhammad. You see, where do you stand? This is ridiculous. Simply knowing the facts about such disputes which arose between Muhammad reciters is enough to dismiss the claim that the Quran has been perfectly preserved. But no problem, we are still going to go deep to highlight other problems. When Ibn Umar, son of the second Muslim caliph, heard people declaring that they knew the entire Quran, he said to them, Let none of you say, I have learned the whole of the Quran. For how does he know what the whole of it is, when much of it has disappeared? Let him rather say, I have learned what is extant thereof. So this is in Abu Ubaid Kitab Fad'i al-Quran. One of Muhammad's companions, Abu Musa, supported this claim when he said that early Muslims forgot 2 surahs or chapters due to laziness, as we read from Sahih Muslim 2286. Abu Musa al-Ashri, sorry for the pronunciation, sent for the reciters of Basra. They came to him and they were 300 in number. They recited the Quran and he said, You are the best among the inhabitants of Basra, for you are the reciters among them. So, continue to recite it, but bear in mind that your reciting for a long time may not harden your heart as were hardening the heart of those before you. We used to recite a surah which resembled in length and severity to Surah Barahat. I have however forgotten it with the exception of this which I remembered out of it. If there were two valleys full of riches for the son of Adam, he would long for a third valley, and nothing would fill the stomach of the Son of Man but dust. And we used to recite a surah which resembled one of the surahs of Mushabihat, and I have forgotten it. This shows that entire chapter of the Quran were forgotten. We know further that large sections of certain chapters came up missing. For instance, Muhammad's wife Aisha said that roughly 2/3 of Surah 33 were lost. We read in Abu Ubaid Kitab Fadiyah al-Quran. Aisha said Surah Al-Ahzab used to be recited in the time of the Prophet with 200 verses. But when Uthman wrote out the codices, he was unable to procure more of it than there is in today, that is 73 verses. So according to Aisha, the collectors simply couldn't find all of Surah 33. But why couldn't they find all of Surah 33? Why not? As we have seen, many Ufas were killed at the Battle of Yamamam. So apparently, no one who knew the entire chapter 33 survived. Aisha also tells us that individual verses of the Quran disappear, sometimes in a very interesting way. We read in Sunan Ibn Majah 1944. It was narrated that Aisha said, "The verse of stoning and of breastfeeding an adult 10 times was revealed, and the paper was with me under my pillow. When the messenger of Allah died, we were preoccupied with his death, and a tame sheep came in and ate it." So we see that the verses on stoning and breastfeeding an adult 10 times are not in the Quran today. Why is that so? Aisha's sheep ate them. This is so funny, man. Since entire chapters, large portions of chapters, and individual verses of the Quran were lost, it should come as no surprise that short phrases were forgotten as well. Let's consider two examples. First, Surah 33 verse 6 declares that the Prophet is closer to the believers than their own self and his wife and their mothers. Ubay bin Ka'b and other early Muslims heard that a phrase, I quote, "and he is a father of them," is missing from this verse. Even the great translator Yusuf Ali admits this in his commentary. Ali writes, "In some qira'as like that of Ubay bin Ka'b occur also the word, I also quote, and he is a father of them, which imply his spiritual relationship and connection with the world, and his wife are their mothers." You can get this from Abdullah Yusuf Ali, The Meaning of the Quran, note 3674. It seems that Muslims have been left with an incomplete verse. Second, if we open a modern edition of the Quran, we find that Surah 2 verse 238 command Muslims to guide strictly your habit of prayers, especially the middle prayer, and stand before Allah in a devout frame of mind. According to Aisha, Muhammad recited this verse as follows: "Guide strictly the 5 obligatory prayers and the middle salat and Salat al-Asr, and stood before Allah with obedience." You can read more about this on Jami at Tamidi 2982. Therefore, the phrase "and Salat al-Asr" is missing from modern edition. Why didn't you guys notice this? So, from everything we have seen so far, it is so obvious and without any shadow of a doubt that the Quran has changed significantly over the years. The evidence shows that entire chapters were lost, large sections of chapters came up missing, individual verses were forgotten, phrases have been left out, and so on. Muhammad's best teachers and reciters couldn't even agree on which chapters were supposed to be in the Quran. With all this, it raises an obvious question. What is the difference between a book that has been perfectly preserved and a book that hasn't been perfectly preserved? The typical characteristics of a book that hasn't been perfectly preserved are missing chapters, disagreements about what goes back to the original, etc. But the Quran has all of these characteristics. Therefore, Muslims who are aware of the evidence but also want to maintain the perfect preservation of the Quran always like saying, yes, the Quran has all the characteristics of a book that hasn't been perfectly preserved, but it has been perfectly preserved anyway. Wait, does any of this claim even make sense? Even a 3-year-old baby would not make such a claim. Anyone who has read the Muslim sources, the Hadith and the Tafsir, knows that the Quran has not been perfectly preserved. Muslim scholars are well aware of the fact that the Quran has been changed, and yet they tell the less educated Muslims that the Quran has always been exactly the same. Why are Muslim scholars and leaders deceptive about the history of their book? Moreover, if they are willing to deceive their fellow Muslims about the history of the Quran, what else are they being deceptive about? Friends, brothers and sisters, whenever a book is passed on and copied by human beings, mistakes are going to be made. For example, spelling errors, intentional changes and so on. But the problem here is the Quran promises that no changes in its text will ever occur. As we have seen in this study, the Quran has not been perfectly preserved, which means that the promise of Surah 15:9, where Allah promised to preserve the book, has not been kept. And since the book was not preserved, therefore Allah is a liar for saying he will surely preserve the book, which he didn't. If this is the case, and God is all-knowing and all-powerful and a holy God, God doesn't lie, he keeps his promises, then the Quran cannot be the word of God. In that case, you all Muslims need to wake up and study this with an open mind. Well, the choice is yours. With all this, I don't even need to go further, but for those Muslims, it may take multiple videos in order for their eyes to be opened. So, we are going to continue in the next chapter. Bye bye.